I was standing at my wife's funeral when I saw her alive. Not a ghost, not a trick of grief. Her, standing in the crowd near the back of the chapel, eyes locked on mine. She lifted one finger to her lips, slow, deliberate, telling me not to react. Then my phone vibrated in my hand. We're not safe. Leave immediately. Before I tell you everything that followed that moment, before the lies unraveled and the people closest to me showed who they really were, let me ask you something. If stories about hidden truths, quiet betrayals, and survival under pressure pull you in, take a second to support this space. Follow the channel and drop a comment saying where you're listening from. It helps these stories reach the people who need them most. Now let me take you back. It was raining that morning in Portland. The kind of gray, soaking rain that feels less like weather and more like a mood imposed on the city. The chapel smelled of wet wool, lilies, and old wood. People spoke in whispers, offered stiff condolences, avoided my eyes. I accepted all of it mechanically, like I was watching myself from a distance. My wife's casket sat at the front beneath a spray of white orchids. That detail bothered me more than it should have. Elena hated orchids. She said they looked cold, staged, like something chosen by someone who didn't really know you. My sister-in-law had picked them, not me. The minister's voice drifted in and out of my awareness. I remember the rain hitting the stained glass windows harder than I remember a single word he said. My hands were folded in front of me, fingers numb. Everyone thought I was in shock. They weren't wrong, but not for the reason they assumed. Then I saw her. She stood half hidden behind two men I recognized from a firm where Elena had worked as a financial analyst. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, darker. Her face looked thinner, but it was unmistakably her. The same steady eyes, the same expression she wore when she needed me to listen. For a split second, my brain rejected what my eyes were telling me. Grief can do strange things, people say. Hallucinations, denial. But this wasn't that. This was sharp, focused, real. Our eyes met. No panic crossed her face. No confusion. Just urgency. Then she raised one finger to her lips. Don't say anything. The room tilted. My pulse hammered so loudly I was sure someone nearby could hear it. My knees weakened, and I gripped the back of the pew in front of me to stay upright. She was alive. Before I could move, before I could even blink, someone touched my arm. Ethan, a soft voice said, too close to my ear, "You should sit down." It was Mara, Elena's older sister. Her hand rested on my forearm, firm, controlling, masked as concern. Her smile was gentle, practiced. "You look like you're about to pass out," she added. I nodded, lowering myself back onto the bench, my eyes darting toward the back of the chapel. She was gone. The space where she'd been standing was empty. Just strangers. Just grief-stricken faces. I scanned the room, my heart racing, but no one looked back at me with recognition. No one else seemed disturbed. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe grief had finally broken something in me. The service ended in a blur. I moved the receiving line like a ghost, accepting murmured condolences, hollow phrases that bounced off me without leaving a mark. People kept saying the same things. She was such a good woman. Gone too soon. You'll get through this. My daughter Lena stood beside her husband Caleb, his arm wrapped tightly around her shoulders. He looked at me often, concern etched across his face, but there was something else there too, something measured, watchful. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Mara appeared again, opening a black umbrella over both of us. "You shouldn't be alone tonight," she said firmly. "Come stay with us. Caleb can take Lena home later." The way she said it wasn't suggestion. "I'll be fine," I said, forcing a normal smile. "I just need some time." Her eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second before softening again. "Of course. Just don't isolate yourself. Grief can make people do irrational things." She squeezed my arm and walked away. I stood there for another minute, pretending to adjust my coat when my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "We're not safe. Leave immediately." My breath caught. That word, "we," hit harder than anything else. I turned slowly, scanning the parking lot. Across the street, a black sedan idled with its headlights on. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside. The car wasn't parked casually. It was positioned directly facing the church entrance. I felt watched. Mara and Caleb stood near the steps now, talking quietly. Caleb glanced toward me, then subtly turned his body, blocking my view of the street for just a moment. When he stepped aside again, the sedan was still there. I didn't think. I just moved. I walked to my car, hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice. Once inside, I locked the doors and started the engine. Another message flashed on my screen. Don't go home. I pulled out into traffic, without looking back. As I drove through rain-blurred streets, my phone buzzed again. Trust no one. Not even them. I didn't sleep that night. I checked into a cheap roadside motel an hour south of the city, paid cash, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at my phone until dawn. Every sound outside made me tense. Every passing car felt like a threat. By morning, one truth had settled deep in my chest. Elena hadn't died, and someone very close to me knew exactly why she'd disappeared. I didn't go back to the motel after that message. Something in my gut told me staying still was exactly what they wanted. I drove instead. No destination programmed. Just instinct guided me through unfamiliar roads until the city thinned into long stretches of highway and fields blurred past my windshield. My phone stayed dark in the cup holder, powered off. For the first time since the funeral, the silence felt intentional, protective. By late afternoon, I pulled into a rest stop outside a small town I'd never heard of. I parked between two semis, cut the engine, and sat there breathing until my hands stopped shaking. That was when reality finally settled in. My husband wasn't dead. Someone wanted me quiet, and the people I'd trusted most were orbiting far too close for comfort. I powered the phone back on just long enough to check for new messages. Nothing. No threats. No warnings. That scared me more than the texts themselves. I needed information, real, verifiable facts. Not instincts, not fear. Facts were the only thing that had ever steadied me, even back when James and I were first married and broke and uncertain. I opened my laptop on the passenger seat. I stayed at the rest stop until nightfall, then booked a room under a different name at a roadside inn 20 minutes away. Cash only. No credit card. The clerk barely looked up when I signed the register. Perfect. That night, sleep came in fragments. Every sound outside my door felt amplified. At one point, I dreamed James was standing at the footbed, trying to speak, but unable to make a sound. I woke up gasping, heart racing, convinced for half a second that he'd actually been there. In the morning, I made a decision that scared me more than any threat message. I was going back to Chicago. Not to my house, not to Caroline, but to James's office. The accounting firm was housed in a sleek downtown building with mirrored glass and a lobby that smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and money. I hadn't been there since before the accident. Walking through the revolving doors felt surreal, like stepping into a life that no longer belonged to me. The receptionist looked up, surprised. Mrs. Morris, I'm so sorry. I just need to grab a few of James's personal items, I said calmly, before she could finish. HR approved it. That was a lie. But grief grants a strange kind of invisibility. People hesitate to question a widow. She nodded, eyes soft. Of course. His office is just as he left it. Another lie. The office had been stripped bare. No photos. No files. No personal effects. Even the framed picture of Sophie from her college graduation was gone. The desk drawers were empty. The shelves wiped clean. It felt less like tidying and more like erasure. I stood there too long, staring, until a voice behind me said quietly, "You shouldn't be here." I turned sharply. Marcus Chin stood in the doorway, his expression tight with worry. "Marcus." I breathed. "Thank God." He glanced down the hallway, then stepped inside and closed the door. "You need to leave. Now." "You know," I said. It wasn't a question. He hesitated, then nodded once. "James came to me months ago. He said if anything happened to him, something very bad was already in motion. What did he find? I asked. Marcus swallowed. Caroline, Derek, offshore accounts. They were bleeding clients dry and laundering the money through real estate fronts. James was documenting everything. He was going to report it. And then he died. Yes. I stepped closer. Is he alive? Marcus didn't answer immediately. That was answer enough. Where is he? I whispered. I don't know, he said honestly. But I know this. If Caroline finds out you're asking these questions, you're in danger. I already am, I replied. His jaw tightened. Then listen carefully. There's a backup server James set up off-site. He didn't trust internal systems. If anything happened, he wanted the data preserved. Where? Marcus scribbled an address on a scrap of paper from his pocket. Storage facility. South Loop. Unit registered under a dummy LLC. I folded the paper into my coat pocket. Thank you. He caught my arm as I turned to leave. Jennifer, if you see him, tell him I tried. I nodded, throat tight, and left without looking back. The storage unit smelled like dust and coal metal. My hands shook as I unlocked the padlock. Inside was a single hard case, military grade, sealed tight. I opened it and nearly collapsed. Everything was there. Ledgers, transfers, contracts, audio files, copies of emails. A meticulous archive of fraud so detailed it made my head spin. James hadn't just suspected something. He'd mapped the entire operation. At the bottom of the case was a burner phone. It powered on with a single notification. One missed message. Sent 2 hours ago. Unknown number. I knew you'd find this. I'm close, but you're not safe yet. Don't trust Sophie's husband. Meet me tomorrow. I'll explain everything. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. James was alive. And tomorrow, everything was about to change. I sat on the cold concrete floor of the storage unit, long after the screen dimmed, my mind racing faster than my body could keep up with. James was alive. He was close. And he was telling me, again, that we weren't safe. Especially not from Derek. That name hit harder than anything else. My son-in-law, the man who held my daughter's hand at the funeral, the man who cried at the right moments, said the right words, insisted on taking care of things when I was too numb to think straight. I packed the hard case quickly, wiped down the lock, and left the unit exactly as I'd found it. By the time I reached my car, my hands were steady again. Fear had burned itself out, replaced by something colder and sharper. Clarity. I drove without music, without checking my mirrors obsessively, without answering calls. I needed time to think. Real thinking, not reacting. James said not to trust Derek. That meant Sophie was in danger, whether she knew it or not. And I couldn't warn her directly, not yet. If Derek sensed even a hint of suspicion, he'd tighten his grip. People like him always did when control started slipping. I checked into another motel that night. Farther from the city, farther from everything familiar. I laid the hard case on the bed and opened again, this time forcing myself to slow down. James had always been thorough, but this was something else. There were timelines mapped out to the hour. Flowcharts connecting shell companies to trusts to offshore accounts back to domestic investments. Caroline's name appeared everywhere, sometimes directly, sometimes in behind layers of legal insulation. And Derek, his name showed up too often to be coincidence. Consulting signatures, approval memos, emails advising risk mitigation, and document restructuring. He hadn't just been involved. He'd been essential. At the bottom of one folder was a single document labeled contingency. I opened it. If you're reading this, James had written, then I'm either dead or pretending to be. Either way, they'll think you're broken, distracted, harmless. Let them. Do not confront Caroline. Do not confront Derek. They are most dangerous when cornered. Trust your instincts. And trust that I never would have left you unless there was no other way. My vision blurred. But I didn't let myself cry. Not yet. There was a time and place written beneath the message. An address. Noon tomorrow. I barely slept. Morning came gray and heavy. I showered, dressed simply, and left everything unnecessary behind. The hard case stayed locked in the trunk. I brought only the burner phone, my regular phone powered off, and my keys. The address led me to an industrial stretch near the river. Old warehouses converted into studios, offices, and forgotten corners. I parked where I could see the street clearly and waited. At 11:57, a man stepped out from between two buildings. I knew his walk before I saw his face. James, they're watching, he continued. Not constantly, but enough. Caroline has people everywhere. Derek especially. He's been pushing to contain fallout since the accident. So it was supposed to kill you, I said. James nodded. The crash was meant to scare me into silence. When that didn't work, it became permanent. I barely got out. And Thomas Rivera? James's jaw tightened. He didn't. The words landed like a punch. He tried to disappear too, James said, but they found him before he could. I closed my eyes, steadying myself. Derek's involved. I saw everything. I know, James replied. He's deeper in than Caroline realizes. He's been skimming for himself too. That's why he's dangerous. He has something to lose from everyone. Then Sophie. She's leverage, James said bluntly. To him. To Caroline. They think you'll stay quiet to protect her. I met his gaze. They're wrong. A car passed slowly at the end of the street. James stiffened. We don't have much time, he said. I've been working with someone on the outside. Quietly. Federal level. But we need one thing we don't have yet. What? Proof of intent. Not just financial crimes. Threats. Coercion. Something that shows they were willing to hurt family, to protect themselves. I thought of the messages. The photo slid under my door. The words, Sophie gets hurt. I have that, I said. James exhaled, something like relief flickering across his face. Good. Then we can end this. How? I asked. He looked at me, serious now, by letting them think they're still in control. That afternoon, I did exactly what Caroline expected. I called her. Her voice softened instantly, coated in concern. Jennifer, I've been worried sick. I'm tired, I said quietly. I can't do this anymore. The fear, the running. I just want my life back. There was a pause, brief but telling. That's very wise, Caroline said. Come home. We'll take care of everything. I hung up and looked at James. She bought it, I said. He nodded. Good, because now she'll make a mistake. And this time we'd be ready. Caroline didn't waste time. By that evening, she texted me an address and a time. Neutral ground, she said. A place where we could talk like family. That phrase didn't scare me anymore. It clarified everything. James and I split up on purpose. If they were watching, and we knew they needed to believe I was still alone, still scared, still manageable. James disappeared again, slipping back into the shadow life he'd mastered over the last few months, while I drove toward the meeting point with my heart steady and my hands calm. Fear had done its job already. Now it was discipline's turn. The building Caroline chose sat at the edge of the financial district, an old private office space her family trust still quietly owned. Of course they did. Power always hid behind anonymity. I parked where instructed and walked in without hesitation. She was already there. Caroline sat at the head of a long conference table, perfectly composed, legs crossed, hands folded. Derek stood near the window, his reflection faint in the glass. When he turned and saw me, his jaw tightened. You came, Caroline said, smiling. I knew you would. I'm done running, I replied evenly. You wanted to talk. She gestured for me to sit. I didn't. This doesn't end the way you think it does, Derek said, his voice sharp now. You're in over your head. I met his eyes. Funny, that's exactly what James said about you. The room changed instantly. Caroline's smile froze. Derek's face drained of color. You shouldn't say his name, Caroline said softly. You shouldn't have tried to erase him, I replied. She stood slowly, every movement controlled. You think this ends with a confession? With justice? People like us don't lose the way you think we do. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. James stepped into the room. For the first time, Caroline truly lost control. Her breath caught. Her composure shattered just enough to show the panic underneath. "You're supposed to be dead," she whispered. "So were your lies," James said calmly. "Turns out neither stayed buried." Derek moved back instinctively, his hand twitching toward his pocket. "Don't," James warned. I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the table. I pressed play. Caroline's own voice filled the room, clear, unmistakable. "You have a daughter. Think very carefully before you dig any further." Silence followed. Heavy, final. Sirens cut through the distance. Caroline turned toward the sound, then back to me. Her eyes burned with fury and disbelief. "You think this makes you powerful?" "No," I said quietly. "It makes me finish being afraid." Police flooded the room moments later. Derek didn't resist. Caroline didn't scream. She just stared at me as they cuffed her, as if trying to memorize my face for whatever story she'd tell herself next. James stood beside me as they were led away. "It's over," he said. And for the first time, I believed it. The aftermath came fast. Indictments, headlines, frozen accounts. Caroline's empire collapsed in weeks under the weight of evidence she'd assumed no one would ever connect. Derek tried to bargain. It didn't work. Too many signatures. Too many threats. Too many witnesses. Sophie cried when she learned the truth. Not because she doubted me, but because she finally understood how close she'd been to becoming collateral damage. She hugged her father like she was afraid he might vanish again. He didn't. We didn't go back to our old life. We didn't try to repair what had been built on lies. We left. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere honest. Somewhere where no one knew our names or expected anything from us except decency. Sometimes I still think about that funeral. About the moment our eyes met across a room full of grief and lies. About the warning that saved us both. "We're not safe. Leave immediately." I did, and it saved my life. If you stayed with me until the end of this story, thank you. If it moved you, unsettled you, or made you think about the things we overlook when we trust too easily, please support this channel. Subscribe, share it with someone who needs it, and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Stories like this matter because the silence is how lies survive.